when I looked at your resume, there's a kind of period that you've consolidated, which is sort of early 90s, BHP, late 80s, early 90s, through to 2007. And there was a series of project management, some consultancy had thrown in there as well, but amazing organizations, right? So you have BHP, SMS Consulting, Anderson Consulting, ITRM, IAG. Then you pivot and you go to the public sector. Sort of Department of Justice and VicGov, and through that kind of period of about 20 years, through there actually there was all sorts of tenures from sort of 12 months to 4 years in roles, and so I'm just interested that kind of formative period of your career. What was kind of going on at that stage?
So much change, much change within business, more broadly, a wave of transformation. Although that's not the language we used back then. But organisations were very, very keen to find an edge, and that edge manifested itself in very, very large change programs. I think about, I think what working at BHP gave me was the discipline of lean, understanding manufacturing, understanding how to read a balance sheet, understanding what drives a business, understanding how do you actually structure a team? So the fundamentals of what you do, I learnt at BHP. So the DNA effectively was laid, and I still today refer to my quality training 30 odd years ago because you know what? It's still relevant today. Lean manufacturing is the secret sauce, I still believe, in a lot of the work that we do today. But
well, and it's interesting because a lot of that was formative through probably the 70s and 80s in Japanese manufacturing, where the differentiator was we could make the product quicker and cheaper. It wasn't about innovation so much. I mean, that's a generalization, by the way, but it was speed, efficiency, quality, product. And it's really interesting to see how that transformed from manufacturing to technology, because that became a much more dominant force.
Absolutely.
So great place, great time for you to start your career.
Oh, it was.
With sort of BHP. What were the biggest challenges you were kind of through those first 20 years or so of kind of building your career?
Finding my voice.
Okay.
Women weren't necessarily the norm. And even today, quite often you'll be the only woman in. It's really sad and tragic, but it's not unusual to be the only woman in a leadership team. Yeah. Or in a meeting, or it just happens. It still happens today. That was a challenge. Not that you can't build professional relationships with men. Of course you do. Yeah. But again, back then, my husband and I have 2 children who are now they're adults, but the drivers of caring for your family, trying to be there, to be able to balance it, especially when the kids were quite young, were difficult, were very, very difficult. We were fortunate that my husband was able to, we could split it. But for me, there was never any concession anywhere I worked until I got into reasonably senior roles. Was there a consideration of you can't go out to that dinner, you can't do, none of that was even a consideration because the guys typically had partners who could accommodate that. Not, good on them. Nothing but admiration, but it was a different time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about your description of your high school years of being the outsider. I don't think that was quite the word you used, but you were kind of used to that. Maybe that kind of your childhood set you up for going into tech as and being the only woman often in the room, not being uncomfortable by being that outsider and just leaning into it.
Oh, absolutely. And I am really comfortable in my own skin. It's a skill I've had to learn. So I'm an introvert by nature. You wouldn't know it when you meet me, by the way.
You wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know it, but INFJ for the curious. Yeah. And I am an absolute raging introvert.
Yeah, right.
But I would live in a world of people who aren't necessarily that. And you adapt. And I think adapting, getting comfortable with who you are, getting comfortable with your identity and forming opinions and all of that, I think, kind of comes together in this package
Absolutely.
as you age.
Look, I think you're right. I think it's the first thing when people come into the workplace is it's that kind of expectation versus reality. And that was my next question I was going to ask you is,
of course,
what kind of learning was going on through those first years? What were you learning about yourself, or what was the biggest learning opportunity?
it was more survival. To be honest with you, it's like balancing life, family demands, cultural demands, work demands. It was back then. If you were to ask me how I would describe myself, I was a juggler.
Yeah.
So many balls in the air. Many balls in the air, and hoping not to drop any of them.
Yeah.
Was the key. But continuous learning. So throughout it all, I fundamentally believe that education is the key. I really do. And it has been and continues to be, even at this stage in my career, I still firmly believe that you invest in yourself. And in my formative years, in amongst all of the various balls that were in the air, there was always, one of those was always learning, growing, being curious.
I saw that. I've got it, I think, later in my notes, but I saw some of the different learning you undertook, I think through maybe Harvard Business School, from memory. I saw the Masters in Leadership as well. And again, I was interested to know what motivated you to go down that path.
Curiosity and understanding people. So leadership is a discipline that no one sits down and says, this is how to be a leader. Unless you're very, very lucky, it's not. People do business degrees and there might be an element of HR, there might be an element of some leadership theory thrown in. But typically, coming through the track of science that I did, it really wasn't. And getting into more and more senior roles, what I found was that leadership became more and more important, where organisations start questioning values, start instilling their values, advocating for their values, judging people by values, whether perceived or real. And I got very, very curious about this, so I went and studied it.
Yeah, because we spoke about this earlier. So
we did.
So your study was around, if I remember correctly, it was the way that values translate into corporate performance.
Absolutely, and individuals' performance. So that values congruence of individual.
So what was your kind of takeaway from studying that area?
Very, very controversially, strangely enough, corporate values don't necessarily translate. Our values, being an org psych yourself, this, our values are set before the age of 10.
Yeah.
So it makes it very, very challenging. Our behaviours adapt, but our values are our values. Yeah. So I think organisations should have very rich mission, vision, their aspirations, their ambitions, the behaviours that they'll tolerate. But I think someone's values are their values.
Yeah,
and it's pretty hard to change, in my view.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. I think unless you go through some kind of significant life event, they're going to be pretty fixed. The other thing I'm always interested in with corporate values is, are they kind of descriptive of what the company is or what the company wants to be?
Exactly.
And I'm not sure most companies know that. And it's often my joke that it's quite alarming that many organisations have integrity as a value, and if that's aspirational, that's a real problem in my opinion.
It's so entertaining that when I see that, I'm like, oh. And truth, I've seen truth. Yeah. It's like, so what does that mean?
The other one is fun. Like you will come to work and you will have fun. Like, that's a value. I'm not quite, to me, that's a byproduct of the environment being good and safe.
What do you create? Exactly.
What you create. So, yeah, interesting. Sorry, I'm going to go back to your career because we're going to end up on a different podcast series and Haley's going to be furious. Was there a mindful plan through those early years to really define yourself as a specialist within sort of project management, program management and change?
Not at all. It was all accidental.
It's all, right, okay.
No grand plan.
Yeah.
So for me, it was about solving problems. So what problems presented themselves? And I started to specialise in recovering things that were off the rails.
Yeah.
Which is how I actually came into Australia Post. There was the first time round. There was something that was off the rails. I was asked to come in and do some work and stayed for 5 years. Then left and came back and stayed for another 4, as you do.
So is your problem solving kind of curiosity?
Curiosity led. Back then it was curiosity led. There's a little more discipline to that now, thankfully.
I also noticed, obviously, through that time you had a couple of stints in consulting.
Yes.
How did that differ from being kind of client side, so to speak?
It's much easier being client side, can I say?
Is it? Why'd you say that?
You see the output, the end result. See, I want to see what so starting with the business need and the strategy, I want to be there for the end. I want to see the so what. Yeah. Whereas being on the consulting side, quite often you move from client to client to client based on what area you specialise in, and I want to see that full circle.
Yeah, okay. So you're a problem solver and a completer finisher.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a pretty rare skill set.
Absolutely. I want to see the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. That's interesting. So if you had the choice, you would clearly be more client side than on the consulting side
absolutely.
of things. You also spent some time in the public sector.
Mm-hmm.
How did that kind of shape you?
I learnt so much. I came in and worked with a gentleman called Lynn Thompson. I think he's probably long retired. And I learnt so much from him.
Yeah.
So much from him. I think if I look back, not to suggest that until I came into that role that I didn't learn from others, but it was a different type of learning. It's the first time that I truly saw political wrangling and manoeuvring and understanding how the machinery of government actually worked, how policy is formed. Those things first came into aware but not really involved. Yeah. And for the first time, I actually got to see all of that play and the orchestration and how you actually orchestrate disparate groups with very, very disparate motivators. Yeah. And how do you actually get people to align? How do you create synergy where there is none to start with? So I owe all of that to him.
Yeah, fantastic. Did you, if you had your choice, private or public sector, where do you think you're private? What?
Every day of the week.
Yeah, why is that?
Faster decision making.
Yeah, okay. So you don't mind the wrangling in public sector, but the bureaucracy is probably just a bit too much.
It's too much.
Yeah.
Private sector usually.
Yeah, okay.
I may regret that one day.
I'm sure
but
not.
No, not at all. No.
Again, I think that's part of the early part of the career journey is kind of figuring out what's for you. You know, private or public, big corporate, startup. There's different environments, and I think it's very quick to go into a role or a skill type and then pursue that, but not think about the organisational setting. And I think that's such a major factor.
It is.
In fact, the job's probably the same broadly, different place. The company is the variable often.
Absolutely.
As we think about that then, so kind of as you made those roles, or you moved between those roles and those transitions, how much of that was you being proactive to look for those opportunities, and how much were you kind of being tapped on the shoulder?
A mixture. Typically, especially later in my career, I joined an organisation for a set purpose, and that purpose might be to mobilise and lead a transformation that the organisation needs. And I'll typically be there 3 or 4 years. We will complete that. I will have a break, usually because it is all in. And then I'll look to what might be. Or I'll agree what my exit is and know where I'm going, but still have the break. So there is always a break.
Yeah.
If I've been working solidly on something big for 3 or 4 years, I'll take a couple of months, just regroup.
Yeah.
Usually knowing where I'm going, but.
And I think I talked about this on a previous show actually with a guest, and we were talking about the beauty of working in tech is you get those punctuation points, whereas maybe other careers are not quite the same way, particularly if you're working in projects or transformation. There is normally a kind of starting place and a finishing point, and you have the chance to maybe hop off, recharge,
exactly,
move to a different project, move to a different role, whatever it could be. In 2007, you joined Oz.